Hey, so this morning I wanted to talk about acceptance, including radical acceptance, which is something that right now I'm trying to implement on my life, mostly regarding myself, but also regarding some other things in the world, things outside of my head. Because as I mentioned before, I think the key for me to have very stable lifestyle, very stable life, is for me to have accept myself as I am, and not like the present, but the past as well. I think that if I do that, I'll basically be able to. Like I'll have like more realistic fantasies for once, and since I spend so much of my time daydreaming, although like to be fair, like this past few weeks, like not so much, but historically I've always spent a lot of time daydreaming, and that was like not ideal, but it was also one of those things that I tried everything to stop it, and it didn't really happen, it didn't really work. So I was kind of like, what, then I kind of give up. And not give up, like that is misleading, because I kind of like I decided that since all the effort wasn't really leading anywhere and it was just getting me more frustrated, I'll try to focus on other things to improve my life. That is ultimately kind of like the goal here. I want to just live my life at the best, to the best of my capacity, to the best of my abilities. And as I said, it involves me accepting myself, accepting like what has happened and what has not happened. And I will say that there are a lot of in a lot of ways I have been making a lot of progress. I have been able to like going back now, it's very clear there's like a lot that before I would like to myself about, like right now it's not happening so much. And I have come, of course, I feel sometimes I still have to kind of like affirm it to myself, so that it doesn't really escape my grasp, basically. And it's important, as I said, for me to affirm. A lot of like my affirming has been happening in the shape of my little moleskin that I have, where I've been writing things, I've been writing anything and everything, and I think that is also helping me improve in this regard. Like I have been accepting, because sometimes like there are some things that are very small and you think like that they don't really amount to anything, but like just for you to be able to acknowledge that as how you're feeling, that's what you're thinking, there's that kind of like goes a long way. And maybe like just one small thing doesn't really make that much of a difference, but these things, they kind of like they accumulate. So at a certain point, like all those little things, they really contribute to you embracing who you are, and for me, embracing who I am. And because it's not so much like right now like the present, because I accept my personality traits, I accept my abilities, my shortcomings and everything. Like right now at this point in time, it's pretty, it is what it is. So I think sometimes like the hard thing is like in the past accepting that I was this or I wasn't that. And I've been talking a lot about this because it is something that is very pertinent to like everything else. And I'm really glad that I came across this, because it's been very liberating as well, just existing without the weight of without the pressure of like me of beholding hold of me upholding some some lies, as I said. Some of them, they were not really lies, they were omissions, there were remissions, you could say. There were like a lot of small things, but also big things regarding like who I was as a person, but also who I was professionally, who I was academically, socially. Because for example, I'm an introvert. I've always been an introvert, but like I used to be a little bit more outgoing when I was a kid. Talked about this before, how there was certain trauma, and some traumas that kind of like made me nothing like, I mean, I did have the big trauma when I was 13, but like, and that really made me push everyone away. But I already started doing that some years prior, because of some of my fears. Maybe trauma is not the right word. Some of the fears I had, of like not being, of being rejected, of being, perceived as like a less ideal version of myself, because I guess like I wanted to be wanted, I wanted to be desired. At that point it wasn't anything like physical structure necessarily, it was just socially. But I never really been, like as I mentioned before, like the most popular person, the most, I think I was the thing that I stood out in my whole being was academically I was doing well, so people thought I was smart. But apart from that, like everything else, I was, I wasn't the most, but I also wasn't the least. So there wasn't, much. I think about what was my personality when I was 11, for example. Like that is the age where I first had that, crazy dream slash project slash goal for me, regarding my life. So like there were already remnants of like there was already personality there, but it was kind of like masked, underneath everything. And as I said, like I was smart. That was like my thing, but I wasn't. I think I really wanted to be charismatic. I really wanted to have kind of like a hold on people. Be kind of like memorable, and I wanted to be perceived, and I wanted prominence maybe. It's just that I kind of like wanted that, but that was not really my reality. And I think that every new step, I think because of fear, I ended up, getting increasingly more like, turning into myself, turning inside. And then I was kind of like rejecting the world. But it's good that I can, kind of acknowledge that I wanted those things, because at a certain point I would have very much rejected that idea, that I wanted, that from people, because that would imply that I cared about what people thought. And that was a big thing for me, that I didn't care. I didn't give a single fuck about what anyone had to say about me, which was not true at all. I think I hid myself behind the fact that there were certain things that people wanted to be that I didn't really care about being, but I did have like my own things that I wanted to be, and I was kind of not stuck, but I was kind of like really set in my ways. Like I really had an idea, like a notion of how things were going to go, and I really rejected any deviation from that. But the things that life, they had these deviations, so usually I had to really rationalize things in my head. But as I talked about, like these other past few days, there were moments in my life when I was passive, and that was, as I said, almost like a crime for me to admit this, because I had to always be assertive. If I couldn't be assertive, aggressive, because in my head, like that was kind of like the best, because the ideal, assertive, and then you have aggressive, passive aggressive, and like passive. And like those three, like that was aggressive was like clearly the superior one. I think it's because I was like losing control of my life, of what's happening in my surroundings. I think because of like my big trauma, that kind of like led me to like really have this sick desire for control. I mean, everybody wants control, so like that's not different. But I think that I was taking it to like a very unhealthy level. I was really sacrificing my own well-being so I could have the sense that I was in control of things when I was not. So I would have all these fantasies in which I had control, because that was how I could kind of like get in control back. And I think this continued for many years, because the trauma wasn't healed. Like I only healed it. This event happened in 2011, and I only started talking about it in 2021. And 2022 was the year when I started doing like the EMDR therapy, where I was actually able to face these traumas. So it was over a decade that I was in defense mode all the time, and that's pretty much why I had like so many triggers, which is interesting, because like there was like this essay situation that happened to me. Like it has direct application, for example, in the way I interact with people, like in the way that I felt, like sexually and all that. So like that's, I think, like the direct effect. But there were also some other things that I that I didn't really I guess like right now I look back and it's very clear that like, oh, this is started because of that trauma. But at the time, like they were kind of like these distinct situations. But as I said, so I think even like socially, because I was trying to protect myself from like any and all threats. So some social threats, some financial threats, some academic, professional threats. So like it was all kind of like the same in my head. Anything that made me feel unsafe was something that ended up leading to a lot of like machinations and mechanisms, and like lies in some cases. I thought maybe lies is a strong word. It's just that I was kind of like trying to rewrite the past, so I was trying to look at that traumatic situation in a way that it didn't make me feel weak and vulnerable, which was not, it didn't really happen. Basically, I was very much invested. I mean, that's the thing, because like I was trying to protect my well-being at all costs, but in the process of doing that, I ended up doing things that were kind of like harming myself. I was, they were harming me, and yeah, so like those things, or maybe like on a physical level, because that's the thing. Like I think I understand that if I had a very strong reaction to me feeling unsafe, physically unsafe, because that situation, I was very exposed and I couldn't defend myself. So there was that. But even like other areas, as I mentioned, where like I felt unsafe, it also became a part of like the defense mechanisms. They were set for that. So I was constantly in this fight or flight like mentality, because many things they threaten me. And as I said, like it started, it was something physical, but then in other areas as well, like it's like there was this accumulation of the weight. So like everything was carrying, it had like a little bit of weight, and then you added everything, and it was very overwhelming. It was very overbearing, and I didn't necessarily deal with things very well. Not that. I mean, I think I dealt with them like as you'd expect somebody with a trauma to process things, but like it was not straightforward and healthy, because as I said, like I had so many triggers, because anything that could get me feeling unsafe, like that was that destabilized me, so I had to do something about it. And my fantasies, they were kind of like a comfort, because in them, like those situations and that situation and the inactions and other things that happened and didn't happen following it, like it didn't matter, because I achieved my goal, and that was like that kind of like made up for everything else. So yeah, so I already had the fantasy and the desire, but like now that I think, I feel like it became more of an intenser thing after like that whole situation. I think that I started like I mentioned before, I kind of like pushed my friend group I was a part of, I kind of like pushed people away, and there's nothing like you're totally allowed to do that. But I think that the reason why I did it, which was to kind of like like prevent myself from getting exposed again, like that was not the best. I don't really regret anything, like things happened the way that they did, and I could say like how they were supposed to happen, not because there's anything like any sort of like schemes in place, but because like I am here today, and if things had happened differently, I wouldn't be myself, and that's kind of like an interesting thing, because my life would have been like so much different if that was the case. Although I do think that there are some things that this trauma, it kind of like potentialized, really streamlined the process in some cases of me kind of like having some unhealthy, sometimes even toxic mindsets and behaviors, but like there was already a tendency for that to happen before, as I mentioned. So I think I was already starting to doing these things where maybe I wasn't pushing people away, but I was already like unavailable emotionally. I was there physically, but emotionally I didn't really want to kind of like put myself out there, because as I mentioned before, all those fears that you have, because when you're a kid, like those interactions, they're very important. Like it's something that happened that could happen to me today, for them, some type of rejection. It would be, depending on what it is, it would be kind of like a whatever thing. I would just move on, and that would be it. But when I was a kid, a young teenager, it was the first time that I was experiencing certain things. So I think that I hadn't really had the opportunity to grow and learn from them. So like you have to face rejection for you to be able to handle rejection. I mean, in theory, like I think you could like do it without having to experience rejection in itself. But usually like that's pretty much when you're tested, when the things happen. And I was very yeah, like I think that made me really push people away, push people and things away. Like that was my go-to move, and it was only it kind of things just escalated quickly after the trauma, but it was already happening before. So I think that one way or another, I would end up, maybe maybe not exactly where I was at, but that's what it's something good that I'm like thinking about right now, is that I'm looking back at my middle school and like high school years, and I don't really feel regret. Like I don't feel I maybe like not everything was exactly as I wanted or how it was supposed to be, according to me. But like those were good years. Like those were was formative years, and like I learned a lot, and I was able to kind of like learn a lot about the world and about myself, and I was able to really hone some of my instincts. Of course, that, as I mentioned before, there are some things that I'm like I could have done better, but like I think I'm expected, the expectation is a little reasonable, because I would be able to do this right now, but I like have not only like the benefit of hindsight, but also because some of these things, because I wanted to be like the poster child for like confidence and networking and I wanted to be kind of a prodigy in a way. And I think that high school was frustrating in that way, that I expected myself to be a prodigy, and I did pretty well, but it was not at the level that I wanted. But we go back to like having unrealistic expectations, which is something that I have always struggled with. And like right now, I think I'm the most like well adjusted in there regarding that, like thinking about the past and how things used to be. I was very much a slave to my expectations, so they really destabilized me when I didn't really succeed exactly the way I wanted to. Maybe not exactly, but like I think sometimes like I would deliver good performance, but it wasn't great, it wasn't sensational, it wasn't one of a kind, which I know very unrealistic for me to expect that from me. But like I did have high hopes for myself, and I needed to really perform a certain way in those situations to kind of like justify the way I thought. Because if I didn't, then like I was kind of it threatened, it jeopardized my goals. So I had to be that person, and if I was not, yeah, so basically at that time, like there were a lot of things that I would look at, and like they would make me feel bad about myself and about like my capacity. But right now I'm like, I had a very kind of like normal teenage performance. Like the fears I had, they were founded in the sense that, as I said, like my physical safety was threatened. So like I like felt like I didn't want anything that would threaten me, and that those situations would destabilize me. So like it was very, very much how do I put it? So it was like normal. Basically, I had a normal performance where I wanted something exceptional, and when I didn't, prove myself that way, I was kind of, jeopardizing the present, but more importantly, the future. And like that, I couldn't accept. Like that was, like kind of like it took a toll on me to just have, and it was like an everyday thing. Every day there was a little something that made me kind of like question whether I would be able to acknowledge like my goals. And the thing is that at the time, like I really didn't want to question myself. So I did have these issues, these questions, all of that, but I wouldn't really allow myself to feel that way. So I wouldn't process those emotions. So they just only fueled my fears, and they led to me kind of like having increasingly more grandiose fantasies. Like one thing led to another. It's interesting because I think like it's very obvious that how these things connect, but it never really stopped to think that like my fantasies and my fear for my safety and well-being, like that those two are connected. It makes a lot of sense right now. Just thinking about it, like, oh yeah, I was like I was I was scared, and that's the thing. And also like I didn't want to feel, for the longest time I hated feeling scared, because like I've been scared in that traumatic situation, and it led to nothing. Like that fear did not allow me to kind of to I don't know, it didn't give me any superpowers to like for me to be able to overpower my attacker. So I was so yeah, so I think that feeling, it kind of like was burned, ingrained in my brain as being kind of like one of the worst things ever. So I just really pushed it down, whenever I was afraid. Any feeling, any idea that might lead to me feeling afraid, feeling scared, like I just pushed it, and I created a fantasy in my head where that thing was not an impediment. What I created. Sometimes I would have, like the very delusional thing that a lot of people, think that, if they faced somebody trying to mug them, that they would be able to fight back and do something instead of just not getting hurt and all that. I think that I also have those, not so much anymore, but like I used to have a lot of like those. I think that a lot of like because what I was trying to achieve wasn't necessarily like a physical thing, but like attached to it there was like the physical element of like me thinking of myself being put in certain precarious situations, and then like in my mind I would be able to fight them off, and that would make up for the other time when I wasn't able to fight him off, and like that led to what it led to. Honestly, I'm gonna be more honest about my trauma, because I think I usually talk about it as like the trauma, and I think that it's good that I'm able to be more open about it, because it means that I have been able to overcome that, and like that is kind of like in the past. But yeah, so but I was talking about radical acceptance. So let's go back to that. So I think I have to accept my weaknesses, but because usually when I'm talking about weaknesses, I think about, like mental, moral weaknesses, not so much physical weaknesses, and that is, something that is kind of like a touch, subject for me, because like the trauma that I had, but at the same time, like it is one of the easier things to accomplish, because I mean you're never going to like not fear for your safety when you're out there in the world and all that. But I don't know, there are things that you can do to protect yourself, and if it's going to happen, like if it's supposed to happen, it's going to happen, and that's kind of that. And you just have to hope that you deal with the situation well as it happens. But I'm not gonna lie, like apart from like that, this one traumatic situation, this trauma that I have, my physical safety has not really been challenged that much in my life. I think I'm very fortunate that I've never really been mugged, never really had anything stolen.